Pat Narduzzi wanted respect. Pitt wanted respect. Well, I think they may have it now. Pitt gets the victory at home at Heinz Field, at a rockin' Heinz Field, kind of a rare sight to see for Pitt. A victory over Clemson, 27-17. So Pitt does get the victory over the recent ACC bully and continues their trek to that special season. Kenny Pickett, in particular, continues his trek to a Heisman candidacy potential. This is the Pitt Postgame Show here on Pittsburgh Sports Live and Pittsburgh Sports Now. I'm your host, Mike Asti, and I am going to be joined here in a matter of moments by a guest here of USA Today Sports, Dan Wolken. And we are going to recap this game and talk Kenny Pickett, talk Pitt, talk where Pitt goes from here. So, Dan, first off, I definitely appreciate the time. I know this is a busy day for you, to say the very, very least, in the fall. But first off, Pitt gets the victory. That was really what they had to do more than anything else. Kenny Pickett plays well. They stay the course after a bit of a slow start, and Clemson hanging in there with them early on, ends up pulling away for a pretty decided win. What does this victory, because they were in the driver's seat regardless in terms of the Coastal, in terms of the ACC conference, could easily have lost this and still played for an ACC title. But now that they got this victory and what this could mean to the program, what Clemson's been, what does this win mean for Pitt? And what kind of statement did this victory mean across the country about Kenny Pickett and this Pitt program this year?
Yeah, well, even though Pitt was the favorite in Vegas to win this game, and I think a lot of people, I saw this morning on ESPN, all of their panelists picked Pittsburgh to win, and so did I. But even having said all that, it's a great win for them. It's obviously a very diminished Clemson team. This is not the same kind of quality that we're used to from Clemson. But when you're Pitt and you haven't won a conference title in a long time, this is one of those games that you've got to get through to establish that credibility. And, you look at the schedule the rest of the way, it's extremely manageable for Pitt. I think they're solidly in the driver's seat to win that division. And now, you almost wish you could have that Western Michigan game back, because I still think there's probably going to be a segment of people who don't take Pitt quite seriously because of that loss. But, they've been really good in ACC play. They've won all of their conference games by double digits.
Right.
They look like, from the eye test, like the best team in the league. And, they took care of business. They controlled that game today, really, from the second quarter on.
Yeah, that is going to be one thing that I'm sure will be brought up at the end of the season. Certainly if Pitt does end up in a New Year's Six bowl game, if Pitt would finish the year at 6th or 7th in the rankings, or even 5th, that with all the other teams losing around the country, that, if they just would have done this same thing against Western Michigan, because that's just a bad loss, no matter what you say about everyone else's schedule. That's just a bad loss, the worst loss of a team vying for a conference title right now by far. It is on the schedule. It is on the record. Kenny Pickett was great in that game, but the defense let him down. But this game in particular for Pitt certainly means something for the program, I think, more than saying you're beating this Clemson team. As you mentioned, this is a down Clemson team. Pitt was the favorite, but this is still a big deal for Pitt and for Narduzzi, who's not yet had a 9-win season at Pitt. The recent games against Clemson, they just got shellacked. That does mean something.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you look at the stats from this game, 464 yards of offense for Pitt against a defense that has been really, really stingy. For all of Clemson's issues this year, and most of them have been on offense, their defense has showed up every single week. So, I think you look at just as sort of as an example, when Clemson played Boston College, I'm looking at the stats right now. We're trying to pull up the stats.
Sure.
Boston College didn't have nearly as much success against this Clemson defense as Pitt did today. And so, I think for Pitt and Kenny Pickett, this was the kind of game that a lot of people were going to watch. Maybe had not watched that team very much this season, but this is a weekend where there's not a lot of marquee games. The SEC game, the 3:30 SEC game was kind of a runaway. So I think Pitt probably had more eyeballs on them today than at any time this season, and they really delivered. So that's an awesome thing for Pat Narduzzi and his program.
Yeah, not only does Pitt make a statement, but it obviously continues their journey this year, which has all those goals in front of them, as you mentioned, with Pitt's schedule. Not Murderers Row coming up. They should be favored in every game coming up and potentially even favored in that ACC title game, whether that's against Wake Forest or whoever that may be against, likely Wake at this point. Wake entering the week 16th. They got a big win, but not necessarily impressive against who they were playing. But nonetheless, Pitt has it all in front of them for sure. Dan Wolken here of USA Today Sports joining me on the Pitt Postgame show. Pitt wins this 27-17. Now, Dan, I do want to get to Kenny Pickett because this was mentioned all throughout the broadcast. This has been mentioned by Pitt even the last week or so, and Pat Narduzzi kind of talked about Pitt needing respect, but that also going towards Kenny Pickett individually. His stats have been gaudy all year. Even in the loss, he threw 6 touchdown passes, which tied a team record. He's breaking records by Alex Van Pelt, Dan Marino, etc. No one would have thought this even a couple years ago, but he's having a great year. Stat-wise, having the best year for any college quarterback, but not necessarily getting the respect nationally that some of the others at bigger programs or entering the season as Heisman favorites were getting. Now, after this win, even though it's a Clemson team that's down, but it's still Clemson, and Pitt now continuing on at 6-1, only the one loss out of conference, albeit a bad one. Is Kenny Pickett a legit Heisman candidate for you? And what would he have to do to be a legit finalist and somehow or another steal the award? Obviously not going to be a Vegas better to win it, but by the numbers, by the record, by the situation in conference, he has to be there now, I'd imagine.
Well, first of all, I don't vote for the Heisman, but right. I imagine that for a lot of the people who do, today's game is the kind of performance that makes them take another look, or maybe a first look even at Kenny Pickett. This is a really wide open Heisman race. You don't have this year through the first half of the season anybody who's kind of pulled away from the pack or established themselves as a clear favorite. I mean, you even had people before this week talking about could Caleb Williams from Oklahoma get in the mix, and he didn't play the first, however many games for Oklahoma. People have talked about Bryce Young, and he's certainly a viable candidate. People have talked about Matt Corral at Ole Miss, and they're going to have a good year as well. So it's the kind of year where, maybe people broaden their view of who the candidates are. And as Pitt moves up, and I imagine, they'll keep climbing the rankings if they continue to win these games, and they'll get, to the top 15 and closer to the top 10. And you get in the top 10. I mean, then you're the best player, and you're the reason why a team's in the top 10, and you're having the statistical year that he's having. Yeah, I do think you're going to be a candidate, very likely could be a finalist among the quarterbacks. I'd say right now, it's Kenny Pickett and Bryce Young. And then maybe we'll have some other people who come up in the mix as the season goes on. Got to keep doing it, got to keep putting up numbers. But right now, I think he's right in there.
Yeah, and the numbers in this game, 25 for 39, 302, 7.7 per, a quarterback rating of 146, and of course, the 2 touchdown passes without an interception again. Better stats than even after the Virginia Tech win, because that was a victory for Pitt, but his numbers were not nearly as solid as they've been most of the year. And outside of that one game, despite it being a victory, he's been putting up 300-plus yards, multiple TDs most of the season. Not necessarily against Murderers Row of a schedule, but does have the big win on the road against Tennessee. Now this win, I think he had to do this in this game, get the win, and have the stats. So it puts him right up there. It's obviously going to be tough sledding for a Pitt player to win the Heisman, but we will see if ever there's going to be a chance. Right now, it's Kenny Pickett with the numbers he's putting up here. Now, Dan, I do want to ask you about this Pitt team overall, though. They get this win. They recently have had a defense step up. That was the issue earlier in the season that led to the loss. We've seen the defense really step up. We've seen a running game emerge for Pitt the last couple of weeks, especially, which people have been looking for years from this Pitt offense. Obviously, Addison joining Pickett. Overall, collectively, it appears Pitt's a solid team right now. This is a down overall year, you could say, for the ACC. Wake Forest, probably another solid team from the ACC. Those two teams maybe are the best in the conference, not what people maybe would have thought entering the season. It's been chaos around college football, bad losses for a lot of the teams at the top. Even teams that are winning aren't really impressing, like, say, Oklahoma. What's the ceiling for this Pitt team outside of just winning the conference, getting New Year's Six? Is there a chance at beyond? What would need to occur? how do you evaluate this Pitt team against the country? They've obviously not played a top 15 team yet, but they may if they win the conference. And this is a statement win, but Clemson's not who they've been.
Yeah, as of right now, I don't really consider Pitt a viable playoff team.
Yeah.
Now, let's see where we are at the end of the year. I think the loss to Western Michigan is it's such a big eyesore on their schedule and on their resume that, I think that's really tough to overcome. I think for Pitt, the focus should just be on winning out, win the ACC. And if you can go 12-1, you're going to be in a great New Year's Six bowl game. Maybe if the world falls apart, there's an outside chance you can sneak in. Yeah. I doubt it, because I do think Georgia's going to be solid. I think Alabama's going to be solid. We'll see what Oklahoma does. We'll see about Cincinnati. Oregon looks like they're going to get a big win today and kind of move on. And they kind of have half of an excuse for their one loss because they didn't have their offensive coordinator. And then, the other thing to remember is that Ohio State's gonna, I think, be the team at the end of the year in the Big Ten that's playing for a championship. And if they have one loss, I think they're going to be in the mix too. So I just think there's going to be probably too many teams that they're going to need help from, and I don't think they're probably going to get it. But I think for Pitt, and I think that would be a great accomplishment for them to win the league. It's not something they've done since they've been in the ACC. It's been a long time since they won an outright conference title, and I think now they have a good opportunity.
Yeah, last time Pitt was in the ACC title game, they got shellacked by Clemson. Many thought they were only in there because they won a weaker division. This year, if they get in running the table, regardless of what you may say about the conference, they would legitimately earn their spot. They certainly would have a chance to win the conference and then certainly have a chance at beyond that. And a solid New Year's Six bowl would be great for the program based on we're even a month away from people wanting Pat Narduzzi fired and the whole thing blown up again. So this is certainly a major step for Pitt if they do keep this up and avoid any hiccup down the stretch. But college football could always be chaotic. But yeah, we didn't even get to even potentially the runner-up in the Big Ten may have an argument over Pitt, depending how things shake out. And Ohio State will have a victory at some point against a top 10 team, but it could very well be possible that both Michigan and Ohio State, if they keep winning until that last week, would be ranked ahead of Pitt. And the one that beats the other potentially slides in the playoff, the other one on the outside looking in. So that Western Michigan loss is very, very difficult to try to get over. Just want to get your thoughts before I let you go quickly on Clemson. They were early in this game, solid, but then of course it fell apart. They switched quarterbacks in this game. You don't have Trevor Lawrence. They dealt with tons of injuries this year. They've been a dynasty as an understatement. And Dabo Swinney, I'm sure, going to put it back together. The recruits are coming in. But how far away is Clemson from just turning it right back on and being a playoff team next year? What would you imagine they're going to be doing the rest of the season at this quarterback position? And just how did this unravel? Because some casual fans that don't follow Clemson as closely may not be as aware that Clemson was going to take this dip this season.
Yeah, I mean, they look pretty far away to me, and it'll be interesting to see how they approach this offseason, what changes they make from a coaching standpoint, what changes they make maybe to their scheme. I think the criticism of Clemson's offense has been that maybe it's a little bit stale. They haven't evolved. But I think the truth is they're not as good at running back. They had an all-time ACC rushing leader at running back in Travis Etienne the last several years. He's gone. They don't have an elite quarterback. DJ Uiagalelei showed some flashes last year, but I mean, we all see what we see. He's got a long way to go. He's not very accurate as a passer, and he's not the same quality of runner that the quarterbacks Clemson has really had success with. And then the offensive line is rough, and that's not a quick fix typically in a college program. Now with the transfer portal and things like that, maybe you can upgrade your talent at a certain position quicker than in the past, but that's not something Clemson's done a lot of. They have not been a big transfer portal program. So like I said, for just a variety of reasons, it's going to be super interesting to see what Clemson does. Teams that have been at that level with them, the Ohio States, the Oklahomas, Alabama, they don't really dip like this. This is a pretty big dip. I think, in the quality of play that we've seen, and it's unusual. And so I think it speaks to myriad issues that they're going to have to work on. And yeah, I think they're going to be a little bit at the crossroads as a program.
Yeah, and the one advantage they may have is Kenny Pickett's going to be out of the Pitt program next year. They're going to have some other veterans across the conference that also are going to leave their respective programs. But yeah, a lot to deal with for Clemson, and losing Trevor Lawrence is just the tip of the iceberg. You lose half your offense, you lose ETM on the ground game, and then the O-line being banged up, the defense being banged up. This is the toughest defense that Pitt had to face all year, and eventually it just basically collapsed against that Pitt offense. Dan, I definitely appreciate the time for sure. I know you have a busy day here covering all throughout the country and the college football scene on any given Saturday. So I appreciate you joining me here on the show. Hope to talk to you again soon, maybe have you back on one of these at some point this year.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks a lot.
Absolutely. Again, Dan Wolken, they're from the USA Today Sports outlet. He's covering the country, so I definitely appreciate the brief time that he could join me there. It was a big-time game, so definitely need a big-time guest. You can find him there at Dan Wolken on Twitter to find his coverage, again, at USA Today Sports from him. And Pitt gets the victory. That's the most important thing. That is the big deal for Pitt. This is a statement win. I know. I agree with Dan. People maybe are underrating this. Yes, it's a dip of a season for Clemson. You look at elite programs like Clemson, Alabama, Ohio State. Oh, okay, they're just going to turn it on, be top 4 again next year, maybe get someone to come in and transfer. And maybe that is the case. Maybe they'll get someone to come in and transfer. They have the recruits coming in. It's still going to be a program people are going to want to go to. But they are a little further away than some would maybe think. There's a lot to fix there. The cupboard's a bit bare currently on the roster in terms of who's healthy. And yeah, recruits could help them. They could be a top 4 team next year. But it is rare to see a team drop this far, have multiple conference losses, lose to non-ranked teams. You lose to this Pitt team that is ranked, but you lose the way you're losing. See what happened against NC State. At the time, that's not a ranked team, even though they crawled in there. So maybe the teams they're facing are better than some would have thought at the time of the games. Maybe Clemson's further away than some would think as well. And maybe they'll be back next year. We just don't know. Dabo Swinney, obviously a successful coach. But what I do want to say is that this is nonetheless a solid victory for the Pitt Panthers and a statement win. Pitt needed this win. It didn't matter how it took place. Pitt needed this win. They needed to do this against this team, the recent bully on the block, the team that was Clemson, that's been a national champion, that's been in that mix for 5+ years, seemingly forever, a behemoth, a powerhouse of a program, a big deal for Pitt. This is a big deal win for Pat Narduzzi. This is a big deal win for Kenny Pickett in his Heisman candidacy, and he has to be a Heisman candidate right now. Like Dan, I'm not going to say he's going to win the award. I think winning the award would be unbelievable, especially where Pitt was entering this season, especially what Pitt is as a program in comparison to the programs that normally have the Heisman winner. But to even be a candidate, and he is a legit one right now, to get that national respect, which he's going to get that right now if he wasn't already, that national respect of seeing a game on a national network, seeing a game that you are the primetime game that everyone's watching, the nation's watching, because as Dan mentioned, this is not a major day for college football in terms of back-to-back close games. There have been some close games, but mostly against teams getting upset or against not so great teams. This has not been an Alabama, Georgia type of game. We haven't seen that today, okay? We're not seeing Ohio State, Michigan on this day. Pitt doing this on this day, the nation might have been watching them more than usually watches them, maybe watching them in the game. And Kenny Pickett, a 300-plus performance, the 2 touchdowns, the no picks, a solid outing for him yet again. So the stats are there, the win's there. It is against the Clemson Tigers for what that program means, even though it's a down Clemson team this year is an understatement. And Pitt, they have all of their goals in front of them. They're in the driver's seat to not only win the Coastal, but then beyond. And I think we're now getting into a situation here. When you look at the rest of the schedule, they're going to be favored in all of those games. Let's be blunt about this as I close up this show. Pitt has to win out. There's really no excuse for losing any of these games the rest of the season. I get you could lose any given Saturday in college football. We've seen teams get upset or play poorly against lower level opponents. But again, Pitt's going to be favored in every one of these games the rest of the season. Miami's not close to being back. Virginia, yes, Syracuse has been flirting with upsetting and then upsetting some teams. They've been competitive in most of these games. But North Carolina, of course, Virginia. There might be some fun games. There might be some close battles. There's some legit quarterbacks they're going to face. But do they have the overall team that Pitt does? Do they have a defense playing as well as Pitt has recently? Do they have a running game that now Pitt has? And Pitt didn't have these things earlier in the season when they lost the game to Western Michigan. That is a bad loss. Okay, we can kill this dream, in all honesty. Unless you really get insane chaos. Insane chaos. And we didn't mention Notre Dame with Dan. It would include Notre Dame probably having to lose another one as well. Because Notre Dame runs the table, even though they can't win a conference, obviously, as independent, and they have their only loss of the year to the number 2 team in the country, they're going to have an argument. They should be in well ahead of Pitt, who has that one loss to a non-ranked, multiple-time loser MAC team in Western Michigan. That's just the worst loss. That's just a bad loss, like, with teams vying for that opportunity, okay? That's just a bad loss. There's no way to get around it. So that loss, even if Pitt wins the ACC, because this is an ACC that doesn't have that elite program dominant this year with Clemson obviously not being that team, Wake Forest, NC State would be the others that are competitive this year, but they're not going to get into the playoff. It would be insane chaos to get them there. Pitt is not going to get into the college football playoff this year, even if they win out, even if they win the ACC. And really, that loss probably means they shouldn't be there. Look at the overall resume. But it will tell Pitt fans that, hey, if you don't have that really, really bad loss and you do run a table when you're really, really good and clearly good enough to do so based on what they've been doing, if they would continue, and they lose that game in such a close one with the defense collapsing, if they would have gave this effort in that game, they would have won that game, obviously, then it tells you that you can get in the playoff. It's not unheard of. And whenever they do expand things, which is still a conversation about to happen, then, of course, conference realignment may be delaying it. But yeah, top 8, certainly a viable opportunity, maybe even in this type of season with that one bad loss. But without it, if you go run it, then yeah, you could get in. So it is a possibility for Pitt in general, not this year. That one bad loss will keep them out of the top 4, even if they went out and win the conference. But New Year's 6 and an ACC championship for this Pitt team after we entered the season with Pat Narduzzi in doubt, a couple weeks into the season after a bad loss, Pat Narduzzi's job in doubt for many really wanting him fired right then. No one thought Kenny Pickett would win the Heisman entering this season, even though maybe some thought he was good, unlike they would have thought a couple years earlier. But questions around a run game, around a defense, many players Pitt lost last year. No one thought this was going to happen, even the most optimistic Pitt fan. So an ACC championship, regardless of what's going on in the conference, and a New Year's 6 bowl game, big deal. Big deal, to say the least, for this Pitt program. Big deal for Pat Narduzzi, who bought himself many more years to come. Probably this by far his best individual season as Pitt head coach, if that would occur. Kenny Pickett's going to be gone, but what a career it's been for him. That would be fantastic for this Pitt program. A major statement, to say the very, very least. So that would be a special, great year. And for programs like Pitt, that might be the legitimate ceiling. But again, you run the table. You don't have the Western Michigan loss. They could squeeze in. Who knows what would happen? We would have to have a lot of chaos around college football for it to be beyond that. But a major win for Pitt. It looked like all the way through they had this game. Honestly, it looked all the way. I thought Pitt would win this game too. They were the favorite. They're the ranked team. Clemson was not, but it didn't look in doubt most of this way through. Even when Clemson had them close, never really thought Clemson's offense could hang with Pitt, could do enough against Pitt. And then, of course, when Clemson turns the football over and you're seeing Pitt score defensively, you knew the story was over. Once Pitt had 21, Clemson's only had 21 one time against an FBS team this year. South Carolina State, the one time they hung 40 plus, but of course that's lower level. It just wasn't going to happen. Pitt's offense is good enough to hang with anybody in the country, any defense in the country. They are that dynamic. Kenny Pickett is good. He's one of the best quarterbacks in this country. He deserves to be a Heisman candidate. He really deserves to be a finalist. And we've seen RG3 win that award with 3 losses. We've seen Andre Ware win that award with a couple losses at Baylor and Houston. So not prohibited elite programs by any means. I don't think Kenny Pickett will win it. No, but if he keeps this up and they keep winning, he definitely should be a finalist. I think he will be a finalist in this year where it's so wide open. And Caleb Williams great at the end. They won, but didn't really impress as much as Kenny Pickett did on this day in terms of who they were playing. So I think Kenny Pickett will be right there. He's doing what he has to do. Pitt doing what they have to do. They're going to be favored in all these games. But now there's pressure on this Pitt program. They have to win out. They have to win the conference. They have to get that New Year's Six bowl game. This is a chance for Pitt to seize today, to grab the bull by the horns. This is that opportunity for Pitt. I do see some of you in the chat, so just quickly I will respond. Clemson is done. Yeah, I don't think they're done, obviously. With that recruiting class coming in, they're going to be a contender in years to come, but it won't be as easy as some would think, as Dan alluded to. They have a lot to fix there, and it's very rare for an elite program to dip this much, even if you maybe have a quote-unquote off year. You need UT to keep winning. Yeah, Tennessee losing to Ole Miss, of course, last week with the debacle there with the fans there at the end of the game. Having that be a team that ends up being a quality win, yeah, it's a tough place to play to win in Knoxville, but if they lose a bunch of games, people are going to say that's an overrated win, even though it was on the road. If UT ends up clipping off some wins, they upset a team, they have a solid year maybe overall the rest of the season, kind of turn it around. They almost beat Ole Miss. Ole Miss, a dark horse team right there with Pitt, even though obviously not going to win a conference, unlike Pitt. Then, yeah, that would look better for Pitt. I think Pitt does need another staple victory in addition to this Clemson game, because Clemson could easily lose again, and Clemson is certainly having a down season. Anything else here? Pitt with a big win, Heisman, W. That seems like that's it for the chat. So, again, thanks to Dan Wolken there of USA Today Sports. He has a lot to cover on these Saturdays, so I definitely appreciate the time. He doesn't vote for the Heisman, but definitely said Kenny Pickett would be a vote of his at this point, and obviously a statement win for Pitt. I don't know how you possibly could think anything else, even though, of course, as he mentioned, this Clemson team is more down than maybe some would have thought, and maybe further away from turning it back around than some would have thought. Regardless of all of that, Pitt fans are going to be happy on this day. They're going to go to bed happy on this day. And I don't think I'd be worrying about what Clemson's doing or what's happening around the country. Pitt now gets another victory. Pitt now 6-1. Pitt gets a big statement win over Clemson, the bully on the block in the ACC in recent years. And Pitt now is onward and upward with all their goals in front of them to continue winning, to get into that ACC title game, and then to win it. And then at minimum, they have a New Year's Six bowl game. And I certainly believe if they do all of that and they keep this up, especially with how he's playing, Kenny Pickett will be a guy